Raza, thank you very much for the warm welcome, and to Tim, to Brandy, to Todd, to Raza, and to all of you, thank you. It's an honor and privilege for me to actually be here and to be able just to share a little bit of my past experiences, my current experiences, what you may face going forward in your journalism careers. And by the way, you know, when I told people I was coming to Ithaca College, everyone said, wow, what are you doing at Ithaca College? You guys have got a proud reputation and probably one of the great journalism schools. Just walking around this campus, it reminds me a lot of the college that I went to in South Africa, where I went to a place called Rhodes University. At the time that I studied there, it was the only college in South Africa that actually had journalism. So it was a fight to get in. So to have this opportunity to come to Ithaca and to share my story with you, as I said, is a privilege and honor for me. I'm just going to share just a little bit of my background, how I got into investigative sports journalism, how I got to CNN, and then I'll definitely open the floor to questions. I know Tim will have some questions for me, and happy to answer whatever questions that you do have, and hopefully this will be insightful and help you going forward in your careers. But if I go back to 1990, and that's when I actually started my journalism studies at Rhodes University in South Africa, sitting in the same place that you are right here today. And where do you go from there? I wanted to be a sports commentator. I'm sure a lot of you want to be journalists, you want to be top journalists, you want to be sports, media, political, you want to be involved in TV, print, or radio. And I was very fortunate that the experience to work in all three different genres, being able to work in television, radio, and print. I graduated in 1991 with a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism. My majors were journalism and German. And why German is I was an AFS exchange student to Switzerland. So I came back to South Africa pretty fluent in German. I thought it would just be an easy major. I learned the hard way. German literature wasn't too easy. But after graduating in South Africa in those days, you either had to do 1 year military service or you could go out into your field, but only after you did the military service. So I decided to miss out on the military service and try my luck coming to the United States. And I went to Chicago, where my sister was in 1992. And I was very fortunate. My very first sporting experience, I don't think it could be any better. In those days, Michael Jordan was still playing for the Chicago Bulls. My first American sporting experience was going to the old Chicago Stadium. And the lights go dim, and then comes player number 23 from North Carolina, Michael Jordan. And it was goosebump stuff. And there I knew, already then I felt that I'd made the right decision by coming to the United States and trying to get into sports journalism in the US. It was never going to be easy. South Africa, the NBA, NFL, NHL, and those sports are not very familiar to South Africans. Obviously, it's got wide coverage here. It's got saturation coverage. But it was amazing to be able to learn those sports and become familiar watching the Chicago Bulls or watching the Blackhawks, watching the Cubs. So I'm a little bit of a diehard Chicago fan. Hopefully some of you will excuse me for that. Unless some of you are from Chicago as well. Getting to the US, I sent out probably about 100 resumes. And that's what's going to happen to you. When it comes time to get out into the real world and find employment, I sent out 100 resumes to TV, radio, and print. And this is a message I just want to share, is you must never get disheartened. From the probably 100 resumes that I sent out, I got probably one reply saying, sorry, we don't have any position for you at the moment. We'll keep your resume on file. And that's a message you never want to really see. We'll keep your resume on file. But you've got to keep on knocking doors down. You've got to keep on being positive. Get out into the real world. It's competitive. Sports journalism, any journalism in the United States, it's going to be extremely competitive. Internships, whether it be CNN, ESPN, whatever you are interested in doing. It won't be your perfect job as an internship to start, but knock down those doors now. Because once you get a foot in the door, you can make it your own. The amount of kids from CNN that I saw do internships that are now working at CNN Sports today, there are plenty of them. And that's what I would highly recommend, is be proactive now, not waiting until you've finished your studies. Get those internships now at different places in the media, and you'll be well rewarded in the long run. But to cut a long story short, I got no reply to my resumes, and then at about April 1992, I got a call from Bill McPhail at CNN Sport. But I thought it was my brother-in-law playing a prank on me, because I got no response, so suddenly, why is CNN going to call me? And just as well, I played it kind of cool, because I said, John, this is not funny anymore. I said, you're playing a prank on me. This is not funny. I'm getting tired of not getting any jobs. And the guy said, Graeme Joffe, this is Bill MacPhail from CNN Sport. You're welcome to call my secretary back on the 404 number. Played it a little bit cooler than after that. But anyway, flew down to Atlanta for the interview. CNN at the time, I was in the right place at the right time. CNN International, 1992, the start of the Gulf War. CNN International was just ready for liftoff. And I'll forget, I arrived on a Friday at the CNN Center in Atlanta, and those that have been to Atlanta will know that the Omni Center is right next to the CNN Center, and that's where they have concerts and the Hawks play, and that the hockey team they didn't really have in those days. And that weekend there was a Grateful Dead concert in Atlanta at the Omni Center, and I was walking around the CNN Center and I saw all these kind of different looking people. I'm going, wow, I'm not sure if I could live in Atlanta. I didn't know who the Grateful Dead were. But it just caught me off guard. I go, wow, this is very interesting. You know, I'd never been to Atlanta before. But the interview was very interesting. Bill MacPhail wanted to know about the international sports. On my resume, luckily I had graduated with majors in journalism and German. The journalism was so important. That opened up so many doors for me, especially at CNN. The fact that you got journalism on your resume. And a few weeks later, I got the job offer to be an international sports anchor at CNN. And I want to just share that little part of it there, because at the course that I did at Rhodes University in South Africa didn't gear me up for what I was going to encounter. A live international sports anchor, but starting off learning how to edit, learning how to write script for copy, voice it, and then be able to do a live show. We did a 30-minute live show called World Sport, which covered pretty much everything in sport, from cricket, soccer, rugby, tennis, golf, and then we had to cover all the American sports as well for all the US expats that were living abroad. It was an incredible time, but tough. I think I drowned for the first 2 years. I used to get heartache. I used to get home. My shift was from 7 at night till 3 in the morning. So it felt like my whole life was upside down. I'd get home at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd watch reruns of Jerry Springer, have something to eat, and get to bed at 6 o'clock. So life had changed completely. And learning the hardships of television, that's where you're going to get your best experience, hands-on experience. There's nothing quite like it. The stepping stone you're getting here is incredible. You're getting such a great start, to build up your career. But when you get onto the hands-on experience, it's all about never giving up. When things get too tough, there were days that I wanted to quit. I said, I can't do this. This live television, it's killing me. It's hard. You've got to do everything. There were days that I was really suffering. But that's the beauty about it all. When you go through the hardships, to get to the point where you become comfortable in front of the camera. I wasn't a natural, but CNN International was being broadcast back to South Africa as well. And my mother kept telling me how good I was doing. She was back in South Africa. Meantime, I was terrible in front of the camera. I wasn't a natural. And then after a couple of months, they actually took me off air. And they said to me, look, we need to work with you a little bit. And they sent me to a speech coach. And she said to me, well, you're doing too much head dancing. That's very distracting. If you're an anchor and you're moving your head up and down. But I was excited. I was on CNN. Couldn't believe it. At age 22 or 23, my first job out of college. It was a big thing. But I'm glad that I pushed through, had the best 7 years of my life. CNN Sport definitely set me up for life. And as a sports journalist, you always want to go back and work in your home country. And I always wanted to go back to South Africa. And I went back and carried on working. I worked in television, I worked in radio, worked a little bit in print as well, started my own digital publication. And as a lot of my friends used to tell me, they said, well, you've got a face for radio. I think you should stay in radio. So radio felt like more me. It was more natural. Radio is very easy. No one can see you. You're wearing shorts, you're wearing slops. It's a much more casual medium. And I did enjoy the radio. I worked on a breakfast show for 7 years as a sports reporter. I got to the Sydney Olympic Games, which was incredible. And if I never get to another Olympic Games, I think I might have got to one of the best ever. And for those in television will probably appreciate this, is I was a one-man band because the resources weren't easy. You had tight budgets. So I went to the Sydney Olympics as a one-man band, doing television reports. So I had my tripod, I had my camera, everything for myself. And day one, setting up to do my opening stand-up in front of the Sydney Olympic Stadium, I put my camera on the tripod. The tripod wasn't very sturdy. And I went back to start doing my stand-up. A big gust of wind came, and gone was the camera. It was a tough lesson, expensive lesson to learn, but as you go on in life, the beauty about cameras today is you can do so much by yourself. And one of the greatest things I did after that was traveled throughout the African continent. I did a documentary series called African Sporting Heroes. And on my own, with my camera, just filmed a whole bunch of different stories from Nigeria to Uganda to Tanzania to Rwanda to Kenya, the most beautiful continent. And if any of you ever get that opportunity to go see just incredible people achieving so much with so little. Unfortunately, Africa is a very corrupt continent, and a lot of these athletes are getting so little in help, and they're doing it all on their own. You'll go to the Kenyan athletic trials, Olympic trials, and you'll see 500 people around one track, all trying to reach their dream. Amazing stories, and big smiles, beautiful continent. Anyway, I've spoken enough about just how I got into it, and I now just want to plant the seed, and what my talk is really more about than anything else. Are we fans before we're journalists? Which is a very, very important thing. As a kid growing up, all I wanted to do was play sport. All I wanted to do is meet the athletes. You want to be around the athletes. But as a journalist, there's a fine line between being a fan and then being a journalist. And I'm not sure how many of you would probably know Oscar Pistorius, the story about the Blade Runner, Oscar Pistorius. Oscar I knew extremely well. I knew him from a kid when he was growing up. I went on a charity drive where he was one of the athletes, and I was amazed by this kid growing up, a double amputee, living life, running, doing so much stuff, and so positive, and incredible energy. And as I saw him grow up, fame and fortune started to change him. And if you hear the story about the 2012 London Olympic Games, he was an incredible story. He was probably one of the biggest stories after Usain Bolt at the Olympic Games. The fact of the matter is that he never qualified to run for South Africa at those Olympic Games. The South African sports minister was quoted as saying, Oscar is a political selection. So there's the criteria for your Olympic Committee. Unprecedented. What does it say about the other athletes that are trying to qualify? We've now made a political decision to send an athlete to the Olympic Games. And I was very critical of that because it's all about, my father instilled in us at a young age, all about fair play. So how can you make a political decision ahead of any other decision? And what happened to Oscar after that, even before that, was fame and fortune was changing him. And a lot of the sports journalists in South Africa, a lot of them were very close to Oscar. They would be out drinking with him. There's a great story about one, not a great story, but one of the sports journalists in South Africa that was boasting and bragging about the fact that when Oscar was 18, he took him into an over-23 club and they were all drinking together. And these were the stories. So a lot of these sports journalists were friends of Oscar and weren't prepared to actually expose what was really happening in this kid's life. There were things that happened when Oscar, before the Olympic Games, he was drunk, driving a boat, and basically almost killed 5 people in a boat. He had a facial reconstructive surgery. He hit a pier in the lake while driving a boat drunk. These stories got swept under the carpet. No one wanted to report about that. The BBC, Oscar was trying his utmost to run with able-bodied athletes, and he had become a real big obstacle to the IAAF, which is the International Amateur Athletic Federation. And he stormed out of an interview with the BBC when the interviewer said to him, Oscar, don't you think you're becoming a headache for the IAAF? And he stormed out the interview. So there was a fire burning, and everyone around him was making money. The agent was making money. People going, wow, Oscar, Oscar, Oscar. But no one knew that deep down below there was actually a problem. There was a problem manifesting itself. The Olympic Games comes, he was on a stage with 80,000 people shouting his name. It was a huge stage. The guy was given no help. And then a couple of weeks later, he competes in the Paralympic Games and he gets beaten by another athlete. And he couldn't handle defeat. He blamed the athlete's longer blades on the fact that he had lost to somebody else. And the sports journalists in South Africa all defended Oscar and actually targeted the other athlete who won gold. So it was all, and I was extremely critical on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever it was. And suddenly I became this journalist that everybody said, hey, you're not patriotic anymore. And that's the point that I realized how important, it was more important to be a journalist with your ethics and integrity than it is to be an actual fan. And I still believe to this day, had people taken note and had Oscar been exposed, I'm not saying negatively, but to show that there was a problem manifesting itself, hopefully, possibly, that poor murder would never have happened. His beautiful girlfriend, a family, lost a precious daughter. Oscar got sentenced eventually to 13 years in prison. Think about a guy like David Walsh, Lance Armstrong's story. I'm sure you all remember that. David Walsh became an outcast as a journalist. For 10 years, he pursued Lance Armstrong. The journalists turned against him. Everybody turned against David Walsh, saying, what are you talking about? Greatest athlete we've ever seen. And he knew deep down there was a bigger story. And finally, when David Walsh did expose it all, he became, I wouldn't say, you don't become a celebrity exposing it, but true to himself. And that is so important as a journalist. When you go out there, be true to yourself. Always have your ethics and integrity, and make sure that you expose what you need to expose. Because it's not all about being a fan. It really is more important to be a journalist first. How did I get involved in investigative sports journalism? It was about 7 years ago, and there was a big controversy in South African rugby, which I won't go into, but it involved promotion relegation of a big province. And one of the big provinces, there was a whole lot of negative publicity. And I noticed that one of this publicity was actually coming from one of the journalists who had possible hidden agendas. And it turns out that this journalist that was really pursuing and going after the negativity of this one provincial rugby team was in fact an agent, an unaccredited agent for one of the rugby players with the other team that was going to get promotion. So I went after him, because you're not being objective at all. If you're an agent for a rugby player, then suddenly you're pushing the agenda of this rugby player. And they were also pushing this rugby player to be the next South African captain, next rugby captain. Meantime, this guy was an unaccredited agent and a journalist at the same time. And when I started exposing him, suddenly they were blackmailing me on Twitter. They were sending out stuff to defer. They'll make Graeme Joffe tell everyone why you left CNN. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Instead of answering the real questions, and they kept saying, oh, he's not an agent, not an agent. Meantime, I had all the dirt. And from that day, from starting to expose that controversy on Twitter and being blackmailed, is when all athletes, coaches, and administrators started to confide in me. Unfortunately, South Africa doesn't have a culture of investigative sports journalism. So I became this lone crusader that now was starting to expose everything, from athletics to tennis to golf to soccer to rugby to cricket. It didn't matter which sport. Any coach or athlete who had a grievance started to send me information. And I couldn't sit on the information. I had to expose it. And I started, and I put it in columns. I started writing a column for a digital website. Eventually, the Olympic Committee of South Africa, who was my biggest target, who are some of the most corrupt administrators in world sport. And as you know, the International Olympic Committee, the FIFAs of this world, you have these big boys clubs. And these guys you can never get them out of power. A lot of these guys are involved till they're 80 years of age. And they go on free trips, and they get free dinners, and they get free watches, and they get free houses, and free cars. And these are the people that really need to be exposed to make sure that the athletes of today get a fair chance. It's these big boys clubs that are the real problems. And the Olympic Committee of South Africa is one of them. And they sued me in my personal capacity. They didn't sue the website that I was writing for. They sued me in my personal capacity for 20 million rand, which is about $1.5 million. Just to bully me, silence me, and cripple me financially. They hate the truth. They hate the truth. When people are corrupt, they hate the truth. They hate to be exposed. But it gave me more courage and made me more angry. When they sued me, it made me more determined to actually expose the South African sports mafia. Just important, just quickly coming back to the athletes, coaches, and administrators, very important to know your sources. Because there are obviously a lot of people who have got grievances and have got maybe bridges, and they want to get back at certain people. So it's always so important to be careful of where your sources are coming from. I used to get a lot of anonymous emails, fake Gmail accounts. So sifting through the sources is never easy, but it's something that's so important to make sure that you've got backup information. Never one source is never good enough for an expose. You really ideally want 2, 3, or 4 sources that can back up the information. But digging for dirt became a total addiction for me. Investigative journalism became a pure addiction and changed my life completely. Digging for dirt is, you're consumed by negativity, but it was one of the most exciting things that I think I've ever done, and certainly have no regrets about it. So the malicious prosecution by the Olympic Committee of South Africa, I couldn't be silenced. The South African athletes, most of them have to sign these draconian codes of conduct that they can't criticize the sporting federation that they represent. So the Olympic Committee, the athletes that go to the Olympic Games for South Africa, sign draconian codes of conduct that they can't criticize, they can't talk out. All they can talk about is their own sport and their own event. No freedom of the press. So the athletes can't talk out. So I became a voice for these athletes to fight for what is right and fight to make sure that athletes get a fair chance in South Africa. I became an enemy of the state, media. I lost friends. One of my best friends, closest friend, his brother-in-law, involved in a sports trust in South Africa that became a dirty conduit for the sports ministry of South Africa. And I couldn't, what happens, you've got to report without fear or favor. If a friend's involved in part of the corruption, unfortunately, you've got to make a decision. Your career is probably more important. If you're going to lose friends over that, it's tough decisions that you have to make down the road. But anyway, after being sued, the website that I was working for wanted nothing to do with the lawsuit. They said everyone, when it comes to a whistleblower, everyone runs 100 yards away from you. No one really wants to be associated with a whistleblower. So be prepared if you do go down that road of being an investigative reporter or political reporter. There's going to be some real distance between you and the rest of the people. And it's a good thing, because then it allows you to report as you see fit. Not being too close to too many people is even better. It gives you the distance that you're actually going to need. Also tried to create a groundswell on Twitter. I created a Twitter handle called Dirt of the Day. And every day I would expose something else happening in South African sport. It was so easy, because every day I'd wake up at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning and I'd have emails from athletes, coaches and administrators just giving me all the dirt and then just trying to confirm it all. It was incredible what was happening. And some days I'd have tears rolling down my eyes. As a kid, I was given every opportunity to play sport. And in South Africa today, there are kids, especially from disadvantaged backgrounds, that are not given the opportunity. If you're not a wealthy parent in South Africa, it's unlikely, unless your kid is a superstar, that your child will represent South Africa in any sport. The federations are mostly bankrupt because of corrupt administrators. The administrators are putting the finances in their own back pocket, while parents now have to pay for their kids to go to the different international meets. So can you imagine if every time your child wants to represent the USA in a sport, you've got to pay $5,000 just to send him on a trip? And that's what's happening in South Africa. It's shattering the dreams of Olympic athletes and so many young kids that have sports dreams, which is just killing the sport at the same time. Anyway, when things started to get really tough for me, what happened is the media company of the Olympic Committee of South Africa created a fake website to defame and discredit me. They put it on a survey in Panama. They weren't very clever. I worked it all out, got all the details. But it hurts. When on Google, you open up Google and you typed in Graeme Joffe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, all you'd see was just defamatory, discrediting information. They created this whole website, created news stories every 2 days. My emails had been hacked, my phone had been tapped. I started getting legal threats every week. I started getting followed. I started getting death threats. It's a challenge. It's a big challenge. It's a dark world. It's a lonely road when you go down the road of investigative journalism. Anyway, eventually I had a private investigator helping me. Basically, he worked out that my phone had 3 diversions. My emails had been hacked. And on the 17th of April, 2015, I got the dreaded call. The friend that was helping pay for the acquaintance, paying for the private investigator, basically warned me, they're coming to get you tonight. It was 10 o'clock on a Friday evening. I wasn't brave enough to sit around waiting to see who was coming to get me, whether or not it was a legitimate threat. And I packed a suitcase and left and went underground basically for 4 days, not knowing what my future held. And that's when I decided being a prisoner in your own country is not that much fun. And the private investigator said it'd probably be a good idea to get out of the heat. And that's when I called my sister in Cincinnati. I said, book me a ticket. I think I better get out. And it was a crazy, crazy getaway because while I was at CNN, I had a green card, I had permanent residency. I went back to South Africa and I had to relinquish my green card because after 9/11, basically you either had to live here for 6 months of the year, pay taxes or own property. And obviously I wasn't earning the same as Larry King when I was at CNN, so I didn't have any of that. But I had a 10-year tourist visa, which luckily I was managed to get out on. But when I went underground, I didn't have it with me. And I had to go back and forth trying to find my passport. It was just a hair-raising time to get out of South Africa. And even going through immigration, I was just waiting for a red alert or to be stopped in my tracks as I was going through immigration. But luckily got on the plane without a problem, desperate to an uncertain future. All I had was a suitcase and a laptop. Arrived in Cincinnati. That's where family is so important. You know, we all forget about family sometimes, but lucky my sister and brother-in-law put me up in Cincinnati. I stayed with them. But who would have thought at age 46, after everything I'd done in South Africa, I'd now be living with my sister and brother-in-law. Luckily my nephews were at college, so I stayed in one of my nephew's bedrooms, a little single bedroom with a Michael Jordan poster above my bed. A little bit of an irony in that, but at age 46, my life had really been turned upside down. And I was totally depressed. I'd been displaced. I almost wanted to give up on everything. You go through your mind plays games with you. And all I can say to you there again, a life lesson for me is there will be light at the end of the tunnel. You've got to get up every day, the sun's shining, and make something happen. And luckily I did. I managed to turn my life around. The first year or two in Cincinnati were brutally tough. But I couldn't work for the first year. I applied for asylum when I got to Cincinnati, which sounds kind of drastic, and it is for people that have been displaced. And you've got to have a lot of sympathy for a lot of people that apply for asylum because it's not easy. And here I am 4 years down the road, and I'm still waiting for my asylum application to be hopefully approved. And hopefully that will happen. But in the meantime, they give you work authorization, which gives me the opportunity to work in the United States. I carried on with my digital publication in Cincinnati that I started called Sports Fire, and I started getting more legal threats. But I was getting information still while I was in Cincinnati. I was getting information on a daily basis about the corruption in South African sport. Eventually I gave up with the lawsuits. I started getting legal threats. Eventually I got an urgent interdict against me, and I thought, what am I doing this for? Let me start a new life. I've given up 5 years of my life in a dark space. Let me go into something better now. Back in the United States, back in a great country, let me move on. It was impossible. You cannot move on. You've got to finish what you started. And I carried on poking the bear. I didn't have a mainstream press to work with, but on Twitter and Facebook, very powerful, and still messages today. And I think my Joffe is my boy Twitter handle. I think maybe I got 30,000 followers, whatever it is, but it built up over time, and still making sure that I was fighting for the South African athletes who have no voice. In South Africa, unfortunately, you've got a conflicted media. I was talking about it a little bit earlier. When you go out there, you'll realize, if you send a journalist to a press briefing at the White House, the costs are minimal. If you send a journalist to 3 weeks at the Olympic Games, the costs are enormous to that media house. In South Africa now, a lot of those media houses can't afford to pay for those journalists to go to those events for too long. A World Cup is 6 weeks, 8 weeks. It's huge expenses, airfare, hotel. It's very different to being a news journalist where maybe it's a day or two. A war is a whole different story. So a lot of South African sports journalists are being hand-selected by sporting federations and the Olympic Committee. They're getting free trips, they're getting free dinners. Who wouldn't want that? And that's the choice you make, and that's the grey area. As soon as you start taking free trips and free dinners and free watches, it's totally grey. They are buying favourable journalism from you. Sports journalists today all turned against me. Maybe one or two carried on supporting me, but they all turned against me and basically said this is all conspiracies. Conspiracies. That's what they call them, conspiracies. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I had defamation insurance, which is, I'm not sure if you have that in the United States, but I had insurance for my defamation suit against the Olympic Committee of South Africa. Good or bad, for me it was bad. Because what happens is, the insurers then basically take over the case for you. They appoint the legal team, and they are the ones that are looking after the case. After 4 years of this legal suit hanging over my head for 20 million, there was no action. The Olympic Committee were never coming to court. They knew I had all the dirt on them. The last thing they wanted was for me to stand in the witness box and basically spread the dirt on this Olympic Committee. And what happened is the insurers, after 4 years, when I moved to the United States, they basically gave up on the case and settled with the Olympic Committee for basically 1 million. So gave in on my behalf, where they're basically saying that I decided it was enough. I'd never, ever said that. And the media back in South Africa were laughing at me. I looked like the idiot. Meantime, the insurance company were the ones that settled the lawsuit. Never wanted to apologize for telling the truth. That's one thing you never have to do in life. You never have to apologize for telling the truth. South Africa, an incredible country, unfortunately torn apart. Apartheid was never going to have a happy ending. I was glad, I was very fortunate at college to be part of the first unified soccer team. Hard to believe in a country we have such a diverse population that you'd have a white soccer team and a black soccer team. Couldn't play together. But apartheid, as kids growing up, you knew no different. But I was so happy to be part of the unification process. Playing in the first multiracial soccer team at college was one of the greatest feelings, one of the most satisfying things for me ever. And then I started a township TV program in South Africa where we took free entertainment to the poor areas. A lot of the townships in South Africa don't have running water, don't have electricity, don't have television sets. And what we did is we put up 20 big screen TVs in some of these different poorer areas to give the people free entertainment 7 days a week. And the TVs, we showed kids programs, we showed sport, and the kids created job opportunities for these people to come to the parks. And it was something that really, probably the greatest thing that I've ever done, to be able to give back to society with a social responsibility project, but then to see it ripped apart by government, and basically 7 years later to take those screens down. Probably the worst feeling that I've ever had. But now being back in the USA, I must be honest with you, being chased out of South Africa, whoever chased me out has done me a big favor. Because now I'm back in the greatest country, I think, in the world, where you have freedom of speech and you're able to speak like it is and have the opportunities and have no regrets. I have no regrets for becoming an investigative sports journalist. I got my ethics and integrity, and I'm always going to be true to myself. Reporting without fear, without favor. So important to be a journalist before you're a fan. And today, you guys watch probably a lot of sport. If it's Tiger Woods, if it's Michael Jordan, if it's Mia Hamm from soccer, getting close to these people is tough. Yes, it's great to be in the shadows of great athletes, but you always got to keep a distance. And if I think about that big USA gymnastics scandal, I'm sure there are journalists in this country, sports journalists, who knew about Larry Nassar, I don't know what to call the guy, a disgraceful human being. They would have known him and known about some of his antics, but were probably paid off to keep quiet 10, 15 years ago. And how many girls' lives were harmed by him? And I always believe that there's some journalists that would have known about that story or what he was up to before then, but it was all silenced. And it's amazing what money can buy. Sports journalism is one of the greatest careers. Wake up every day, ready to go to work, feeling good about it. There are not that many jobs in the world where you can wake up every day and go, wow, I want to be a sports journalist. That was my feeling, and that's hopefully going to be a lot of feeling for a lot of you to be a journalist. Don't expect to become rich to be a journalist, but you're going to be rich in passion, and rich in having fun, and rich in doing something that you really like. Journalism is an incredible career. And all I can say to you is good luck when you go out there. Be positive, knock down doors. If I could just share one thing quickly with you before I get to, and I'll probably carry on for a bit longer. I've been able to finally document, 6 years later, document all the corruption and everything that led to me being chased out of South Africa. And this has been a long process. Probably taken me about four years to finally get this done. and it will hopefully be launched on Amazon at the end of this week. Sport, Greed and Betrayal. And the fake website, the media company of the Olympic Committee created a fake website, and on it they had a picture of me and it said wanted for crimes against journalism. And I put that on the front cover just as a little hit back to show, guys, I'm okay now. And if I can read you one quote, probably one of my favorite quotes, just from the front of the book, from a journalist, a rugby journalist in South Africa, who wrote this a few years ago. And he said, "I take my hat off to Graeme Joffe, the lone South African sports journalist in the wilderness, with courage to expose corruption and cronyism as the South African version of David Walsh. He might not get any invites to the cocktail parties, but this guy deserves the support and tip-offs of decent-minded people who want to change for the better. If there was a Pulitzer Prize for courageous sports journalism in South Africa, Joffe would be the only candidate. What many of his don't-touch rivals don't realize is that he's the only go-to man from sources wanting to blow open stories. It's only a matter of time before he drops a bombshell. The system in South African sport is all about sports administrators co-opting journos and then rewarding them with cocktail party invites and dropping the odd little scoop story. It's an easy life if that is mediocrity that you aspire to. If, however, you don't want to speak truth to power, is another story altogether. I don't like to comment excessively on living 7,000 kilometers over the pond, but can tell you the Stockholm Syndrome is a malignant tumor that needs to be chemotherapied fast. South Africa has produced world-class achievements across the spectrum, sport included, and deserves nothing less than the high standards of excellence in its support structure. Never aspire for mediocrity. And as I stand here now, all I know is that I have my ethics and integrity as a journalist. It's been a tough road, but loved every minute of it and have no regrets. Good luck to all of you, and thank you.